Welcome to the news for all the world. Today's report covers a development shaking global energy markets and European politics. A sudden and serious threat has emerged from one of the world's leading energy suppliers, Qatar. The Gulf nation that has long been a reliable source of natural gas for Europe has warned that it may suspend all shipments of liquefied natural gas to the European Union. The reason is a new European law that Qatar believes makes it too risky to continue doing business with the EU. The news has caused an immediate shockwave across financial and political circles in Europe. The situation began when Qatar Energy, the state-owned energy giant, issued a private but strongly worded warning to European energy regulators. The company said that if the new Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, also known as CSDDD, goes into effect as written, it would reconsider every existing gas contract with European buyers. According to sources inside the company, Qatar believes the law creates a legal and financial environment that is impossible to manage. The CSDDD law aims to hold global corporations accountable for environmental and human rights practices throughout their supply chains. The goal is to prevent European companies from indirectly supporting pollution, deforestation, or labor abuse anywhere in the world. However, for a company like Qatar Energy, the scope of this law is enormous. It requires complete traceability of every part of the production chain, from drilling sites in the desert to LNG tankers crossing the oceans. The European Commission has proposed fines of up to 5% of a company's total global revenue for violations. For Qatar Energy, which reported more than $100 billion in revenue last year, even a single penalty could reach billions. This legal risk has triggered what industry analysts are calling a standoff between Brussels and Doha. The European Union argues that environmental responsibility must apply equally to all partners. Qatar insists that it is being unfairly targeted by rules that ignore the complexity of global energy production. As a result, Europe now faces the possibility of losing one of its few remaining stable gas suppliers. To understand the stakes, it is important to look back at how Europe arrived at this fragile energy position. Before the war in Ukraine, Russia supplied more than 40% of Europe's natural gas through pipelines that stretched from Siberia to Germany. When that supply collapsed after sanctions and pipeline sabotage, European governments scrambled to find alternative sources. They turned to liquefied natural gas, shipped by sea from countries such as the United States, Qatar, and Nigeria. Among these suppliers, Qatar became a critical partner. Over the past 2 years, Qatari LNG has covered between 12 and 14% of Europe's total gas imports. During the winter of 2022, when gas storage levels were dangerously low, Qatari cargoes helped prevent blackouts in several countries. European utilities paid record prices to secure these shipments. For many citizens, Qatar's gas literally kept the lights on. Now that same lifeline is in jeopardy. The irony is hard to ignore. A law designed to make Europe's economy cleaner and more ethical could end up cutting off the very fuel that powers its heating systems, power plants, and industries. Officials in Brussels have privately admitted that the timing of this crisis is terrible. With winter approaching and global LNG markets already tight, losing Qatar's supply could drive energy prices to levels not seen since 2022. At the core of this dispute is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive itself. The CSDDD is part of the European Green Deal, a sweeping plan to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. The directive requires companies with more than 1,000 employees and over €400 million in revenue to examine their global operations for environmental and human rights risks. They must identify, prevent, and correct any problems found or face massive financial penalties. While the intention is widely supported, energy producers say the law is impossible to apply to complex supply chains like those in the LNG industry. For Qatar, every cargo involves multiple contractors, shipping firms, and suppliers operating under different jurisdictions. Tracing and auditing each link would require thousands of hours of documentation and legal review. The cost could reach hundreds of millions per year, making exports to Europe unprofitable. Qatari officials also point out that the law exposes them to legal challenges in European courts for events occurring thousands of miles away. For example, If a subcontractor in another country violates labor rules, Qatar Energy could still be fined in the EU even if it had no direct control. This level of liability is something most national companies are unwilling to accept. From a business perspective, Qatar holds significant leverage. The country controls the world's third-largest natural gas reserves and operates one of the most efficient LNG supply networks on the planet. Its North Field expansion project, a $30 billion investment currently under construction, will increase production capacity by 60% by 2027. This expansion gives Qatar confidence that it can redirect shipments toward other markets if relations with Europe deteriorate. Those alternative markets are ready and eager. Across Asia, energy demand is growing rapidly. China, India, and South Korea have all signed long-term LNG supply contracts with Qatar in recent months. Some of these deals last for 27 years, guaranteeing stable prices and volumes for decades. Unlike the European Union, these Asian buyers do not require environmental due diligence beyond standard international regulations. From Qatar's perspective, Asia offers security, predictability, and political neutrality. If Europe insists on applying the CSDDD rules to LNG suppliers, Qatar can simply divert its gas eastward. Analysts from the International Energy Agency warn that such a move could leave Europe short by up to 30 billion cubic meters of gas annually, an amount equal to the total consumption of Spain and Portugal combined. This would cause a sharp rise in market prices and force European buyers back into emergency bidding wars. The problem does not end with Qatar. The controversy has caught the attention of American LNG producers, who also export large volumes to Europe. Several major US companies have voiced support for Qatar's position, arguing that the CSDDD represents excessive regulation. They warn that if Europe continues down this path, they too may prioritize long-term contracts in Asia, where the legal environment is simpler. Together, the United States and Qatar account for more than half of global LNG exports. A coordinated shift away from Europe would create an unprecedented supply squeeze. Energy experts describe this as a potential alliance of convenience between two global energy powers. Both Qatar and the United States are using the threat of market reallocation to pressure Brussels into softening its stance. For now, no formal coordination has been announced, but the message is clear. Europe needs to reconsider or face severe consequences. If Qatar follows through on its threat, the economic impact on Europe could be dramatic. Gas and electricity bills for households could rise by 400 to 500% within months. During the previous energy crisis in 2022, some European governments had to spend hundreds of billions of euros in subsidies to keep prices under control. A repeat of that scenario could push public budgets to the breaking point. Industries would face even greater challenges. Energy-intensive sectors such as chemicals, fertilizers, steel, and glass would struggle to remain competitive. Many companies might relocate production to regions with cheaper energy, a process already described by economists as the beginning of deindustrialization. Factory shutdowns would lead to job losses, reduced tax revenue, and growing political dissatisfaction. Financial markets are also reacting. Futures contracts for natural gas on the Dutch TTF exchange jumped more than 10% after the first reports of Qatar's warning surfaced. Analysts say the move reflects both fear of physical shortages and uncertainty about Europe's regulatory future. If traders believe the CSDDD dispute will last, they may price in a permanent risk premium for European gas, keeping energy costs higher for years. Politically, this crisis is forcing European leaders to confront a difficult balance between environmental ideals and energy realities. Supporters of the CSDDD argue that the world cannot delay action on climate change, even if it causes short-term pain. Critics respond that without affordable energy, industries cannot survive, and citizens cannot heat their homes. The debate has reopened old divisions within the EU between northern countries that prioritize climate goals and southern or eastern members more focused on economic stability. Behind closed doors, however, officials are already searching for a compromise. According to reports from Brussels, the European Commission is discussing a 2-year delay in implementing the CSDDD for the energy sector. This would push enforcement to 2028 and give both European and foreign companies more time to adapt. In addition, Some policymakers are proposing to remove the most controversial provision, the one linking fines to a company's global revenue. Instead, penalties might be limited to the value of contracts within the EU. These potential changes indicate that the EU recognizes the seriousness of the situation. A full gas shutdown by Qatar would be politically and economically catastrophic. By signaling flexibility, Brussels hopes to keep negotiations open and avoid escalation. Still, environmental activists and some member states worry that weakening the directive could undermine its purpose. They argue that exempting energy companies would create loopholes that allow continued pollution abroad. For now, the diplomatic dialogue continues. European energy ministers are expected to meet soon to discuss emergency measures and backup supply options. Some are exploring whether additional cargoes could be secured from the United States or Africa. However, global LNG capacity is already stretched thin, and most available shipments are locked in long-term contracts elsewhere. The reality is that Europe cannot easily replace Qatar's volumes in the short term. Qatar, meanwhile, appears calm and confident. Officials from Doha have stated that their decision is not political but commercial. They insist that Qatar values its European partners, but cannot operate under laws that expose the company to unpredictable legal and financial risks. Energy analysts interpret this as a clear signal that Qatar will not compromise its business model for regulatory demands made outside its sea jurisdiction. The situation also carries broader geopolitical implications. For decades, the European Union and the United States have used their economic power to shape global trade rules. Developing nations often had to follow Western standards to access their markets. The current standoff shows that this balance of power is changing. Resource-rich countries like Qatar now have the leverage to negotiate on their own terms. In a world moving toward multipolarity, energy producers are no longer passive suppliers. They are strategic actors, capable of influencing global policy. The rise of Asia as a major consumer bloc has strengthened their bargaining position. Europe's attempt to export its environmental standards abroad is meeting resistance from partners who have alternatives. The message is clear. Access to resources now depends on mutual respect rather than unilateral demands. Economic experts believe this confrontation could mark a turning point in how global energy trade is regulated. If the EU retreats, it may encourage other countries to challenge European standards in areas such as mining, agriculture, and manufacturing. If it holds firm, it risks long-term isolation from key suppliers. Either outcome will reshape the relationship between resource consumers and producers. Energy security has always been the foundation of modern economies. Europe's experience since 2022 shows how vulnerable even advanced economies can be when supply chains are disrupted. The transition to clean energy remains essential, but it must be managed carefully to avoid unintended consequences. Policies designed to promote sustainability must also account for geopolitical realities. In the short term, European consumers are watching nervously. The approach of winter raises fears of renewed price spikes and possible shortages. Governments are already planning subsidies, storage expansions, and conservation campaigns. The European Central Bank has warned that another energy shock could delay the region's economic recovery and keep inflation high well into next year. For Qatar, the dispute may strengthen its global position. By demonstrating that it can influence markets through policy announcements alone, the country reinforces its role as a major player in world energy affairs. Its pivot to Asia ensures continued revenue, while its stance in Europe sends a message about respecting the sovereignty of suppliers. As for the global LNG market, the outcome of this standoff will be closely watched. Traders, investors, and governments are adjusting their strategies in anticipation of possible disruptions. Some analysts predict that by the end of this decade, Asia will dominate LNG consumption, while Europe will focus on accelerating renewable energy investments to reduce dependency on imports. The coming months will reveal whether diplomacy can bridge the gap between environmental ambition and energy necessity. What happens next will not only affect gas prices, but also define Europe's credibility as a global standard setter. If compromise is reached, it could serve as a model for balancing sustainability with economic pragmatism. If talks fail, the result could be another severe energy crisis with far-reaching political and social consequences. This unfolding story highlights how interconnected global systems have become. A single policy decision in Brussels can ripple across continents, affecting factories in Germany, power plants in France, and households in Italy. It also demonstrates that the era of Western dominance in setting global trade and environmental rules may be coming to an end. The world is entering a phase where power is distributed among several major centers, each pursuing its own interests. For now, both sides are treading carefully. Qatar has not officially halted shipments, and the EU has not withdrawn its directive. Diplomats continue to emphasize cooperation and dialogue. Yet the tension is real, and markets are already reacting as if the threat could become reality. Viewers should expect further statements from both Qatar Energy and European institutions in the coming weeks. Negotiations will likely intensify behind closed doors, as neither side wants to appear weak publicly. But the underlying issue remains unresolved: how to reconcile Europe's environmental vision with the practical demands of global energy supply. This will continue to evolve, and we will keep you informed of every major development. You have been watching the news for all the world, providing facts and context on the most important international stories. If you found this report informative, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more updates from around the world. Thank you for watching.